Welcome, and thank you again for joining us. I appreciate you being with us as we begin our series on service. My talk today is entitled Boots on the Ground. Maybe it's my military background, I have no idea, but I really like the image. But what I'm talking about is service. Albert Schweitzer once wrote, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know, the only ones among you who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve." So the key spiritual practice that we are talking about today is service. My goal today is to begin a discussion of how we step into our gifts of creativity and compassion and kindness, how we grow from them and share them with the world. As I was preparing this talk, I went back to one of my favorite books, I've talked about it before, which is Dr. Roger Walsh's Essential Spirituality. Many of us are familiar with this book. If you are not, I really recommend it to you. If you go to the resource page on our One World Spiritual Center website, you will see the book there and a link to buy it. Dr. Walsh's book is a result of 23 years of research in and practice of the world's spiritual disciplines. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Walsh. And again, I apologize to those who have heard this before. He trained as a psychiatrist with additional training in psychology, physiology, and neuroscience. He published articles and books on the brain and on human behavior. He initially believed, he writes, that whatever could not be measured with the instruments of science simply did not exist. He was agnostic. He was sure that the answers to our behaviors, our motivations, what drives us, behavior and consciousness, could be measured and verified and replicated. Okay, then he started to work with actual patients, and all his certainty started to fade. He writes that he tried to help patients who had behaviors and mental states that he frankly could not figure out, regardless of all his degrees and all his training. In order to learn more about the workings of the human mind, he started psychotherapy himself. He was certain it would be a few interesting weeks, just learn a little bit about it, and not much more. However, as he explored his own mind, he writes, "I discovered an unsuspecting universe within me, as vast and mysterious as the external universe around me. It was literally the greatest shock of my life." He found that this inner world was the secret to discovering more about himself, the vistas of his consciousness that were completely unreachable, unattainable, and unknowable if all he limited himself to was his cognitive awareness. He found, to his amazement, that his cognitive understanding was just the surface. His inner world, as he called it and as he experienced it, was the key to understanding his mind and understanding himself. So he began to meditate. He came to realize that his mind was really far more vast than he ever thought. But he was still troubled. He was still an agnostic. He was firmly tied to the scientific view. He wondered why he was achieving these amazing insights through what he essentially thought was a primitive practice, what he thought was tied to religion in which he did not believe. He spent months puzzling over this question. Then, one day, he had a flash of understanding that changed his life forever. It was one of those epiphany moments, probably when he was thinking about something else, but all of a sudden, just wham, there you have this insight. He recognized, and this is how he writes it, "At their spiritual center, the great religions contain a common core of practices for training the mind." I love that. Let me read it again. "At their spiritual center, the great religions contain a common core of practices for training the mind." He realized that these practices are designed to help us cultivate wisdom and love, to lead us into a broader connection with all that vast universe within that is totally unknown to the science he swore had all the answers. So given this insight, Dr. Walsh plunged into a study of the world's major faith traditions to identify the spiritual practices that lead us to these insights. That's his book. In Essential Spirituality, he identifies 7 what he calls perennial practices that are common to the world's major faith traditions. Following these practices, he writes, will lead us to cultivate kindness and love, joy, peace, vision, wisdom, and generosity. In sharing these insights, Dr. Walsh's goal is to tell us that life can be, as he calls it, ecstatic. That growing spiritual awareness leads us into greater joy, enlightenment, and peace. The goal of these spiritual practices is to connect with the profound joy that is right there at our very center. One of the 7 perennial practices is, as he calls it, expressing spirit in action, embracing generosity and the joy of service. When I say generosity, and when he says generosity, I don't mean only money. I mean a free and loving giving of yourself, your skills, your time, your attention, and your heart. That is what we are exploring this month. When we think of giving and of service, we don't often connect these practices with joy. We may think of duty, obligation, expectations. That is not what is meant by loving service. Selfless giving with no thought of return is a profoundly joyous act. Dr. Walsh uses the example of Mother Teresa's nuns who live in the poorest slums in India and tend the forgotten and the abandoned. They work long hours, they live in the simplest circumstances, they face disease and poverty and death every day as they serve the city's poorest and most desperate. A television interviewer once went to their hospital and asked why all the nuns look so happy. He said, "Is this a put-on?" Mother Teresa replied, "It was not." She said at the time, "Nothing makes you happier than when you really reach out in mercy to someone who is badly hurt." The interviewer wrote, "I have never experienced so sharp a sense of joy." We know from our own experience that acts of love and service need not be huge. Simple acts of kindness and service can transform us and those around us. Gifts of kindness or caring, not requested, reimbursed, and maybe not even recognized. It's a gift. It's a loving gift. It's not a business transaction. It's not a quid pro quo. So why do these instances produce such joy? I believe it's because when we are in complete alignment with the divine that is at our essence, these practices result in joy, result in profound joy. We came here to be kindness, compassion, and love. And when we live those principles, we are truly open channels for spirit expressing. We are truly love in action. Mother Teresa said, "Love cannot remain by itself. It has no meaning. Love has to be put into action, and that action is service." When we awaken, if I can use that word, when we awaken to that place of compassion and love for others, those we know, those we don't, joy is the almost inevitable result, and service is its expression. Another way of putting it is joy is both a cause and a result of loving service. It's both a cause and a result of loving service. In his book, How Can I Help?, Ram Dass wrote that it is in our nature simply to step in and help with no thought of reward. Think about it. When we see somebody struggling with a heavy package, we help. An elderly person has difficulty crossing a street, we stop. Someone in a store becomes ill, we help. Why? Because in that moment, we step outside our own concerns, our own preoccupations, our own head. We feel that a deeper process is at work. We feel that a connection is at work. In service to each other, as he writes, we experience our unity. In service, we participate in the holy, finding it in ourselves, in others, and in our connections. In the Upanishads, it is said, if you want to be happy, be giving. Humans have known this truth for thousands of years. Humans have lived this truth for thousands of years. However, we have so many barriers to generosity. We have so many ways to talk ourselves out of it, talk ourselves out of simply giving, sharing the abundance that has been given so generously to us. Sometimes giving of our time, our money, our effort feels more like a burden than a joy. Sometimes our perception of limitation and lack gives rise to a sense of hopelessness and a conviction there is nothing we can do to make any difference. What do we tell ourselves? I'm just one small person. What can I do? We talk ourselves literally into not helping, saying any effort of ours in the midst of all the global misery would mean nothing. I find that especially true today when it seems like every time I turn on the computer and look at the headlines, there is a problem that just seems absolutely insoluble. Or we tell ourselves that those in poverty or want simply don't deserve our attention. Why should I give my money to that guy? He looks like he can get a job. Why is he holding a sign instead of going out and getting a job? Why should I pay for all those people who don't want to work? Why should I give my money or my time to them? Then, in responding to a thought like that, I remember what Reverend Cliff Dawkins said. I spoke about this last week. When somebody told him that adage, I'd rather teach a man to fish than give him a fish, Reverend Dawkins said, not everyone can learn how to fish, and we need to take care of them as well. We need to take care of them as well. We do. I also find myself, as I was preparing this talk, I also found myself thinking about the concept of my money. If we think that spirit is the source of our abundance, when did it turn into my money? Am I not a steward of this money for the benefit of all, just as I am a steward of the creation that has been so freely given to us, or other resources that have been gifted to us? When I regard my resources, all my resources, as in that way, how does it change the way I spend or save or invest? What happened to make all this stuff mine? Well, nothing. It's not mine. There is a Jewish prayer that gives us a perspective on stewardship, and I'd love to share it with you. And God saw everything that he had made and found it very good. And he said, this is a beautiful world that I have given you. Take good care of it. Do not ruin it. It is said, before the world was created, the Holy One kept creating worlds and destroying them. Finally, he created this one and was satisfied. He said to Adam, this is the last world I shall make. I place it in your hands. Hold it in trust. Not just the world. All the abundance we have been given, we hold in trust. This attitude, the attitude of service and compassion, is an absolute game changer, and it leads you to new places for sure. I am not sure of what all the answers are, but I know that each step on our path requires us to live the questions. I also think it helps to remember and practice what we teach our kids. What do we teach them? To share, to be generous, to be helpful. We teach them these values because we know that that's the way we're supposed to be. We know that's the way we're supposed to live. So why do we teach these fabulous values to our kids and then so often go out the door and do the exact opposite? Sometimes we need our kids to remind us. I am lucky to have kids who remind me. My wife had a business associate several years ago here in town, or actually in Atlanta, since I'm not in Atlanta. The business associate was in Atlanta, and she became ill and had to have emergency surgery while she was there. So when she gets out of the hospital, she was planning on getting on a plane and flying back to wherever she came from right after surgery. So my wife says, no. You are going to come and stay with us for a few days until you are ready to get on a plane and go home. So we told Nick, many of you know Nick, my son, who is so loving and so giving, just an amazing light in this world. So we told him that this lady was coming to stay. So he thought about this for a minute and he said, she ours now? She ours now? We said, no, she's not ours for good, but she's staying here for a few days. He said, we take care of her good. Our kids know that we all belong to each other, even if we sometimes forget it. It is in acts of service that we remember this truth. Each act we do changes our global consciousness, adding to it wisdom and awareness and compassion and love. This energy continues to ripple out and has effects which are boundless. This is how our human consciousness changes on a global level, turning away from fear and greed and violence toward hope, compassion, and community. The change begins with each one of us. There is no other way for this to happen. In his book, The Active Life, Parker Palmer wrote, "To be fully alive is to act. Action is more than movement. It is movement that involves expression, discovery, the formation of ourselves and our world. As we act, we not only express what is in us and help give shape to the world, we also receive what is outside us, and we reshape our inner selves. When we act, the world acts back, and we and the world are co-created." As this energy goes out from us, it also works a change in us. When you open your heart and give to another, what's the first thing that happens? Your heart opens first. The first recipient of this joy is you. You can only give what you already have. That joy begins with you. We are called to be fully alive, to participate, to listen to each other, to be unafraid as we bring all our gifts to bear with joy. We are daily given the opportunity, what's the sports metaphor here, to leave it all on the field. Hold nothing back. We leave it all on the field. A couple of years ago, I read a book, you may have read the same book, by an Australian author named Bronnie Ware. Her book was called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. Ms. Ware, who was a hospice nurse, cared for those making their transitions, and as she sat with them and cared for them, she noticed that many of their concerns as they approached their transitions appeared to be very similar. The first top regret of those facing death was, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Others were, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And I wish I had let myself be happier. So what do these sound like to you? To me, they sound like the wishes of people who walked right by the opportunities to be true to themselves, to listen to the voice of love and joy inside and just go where it led them. We spend so much time doing what other people expect of us, or even worse, doing what we think they expect of us without even checking with them, that we miss the opportunities right in front of us to find joy and happiness and meaning in our lives. We always think we have more time, that we won't run out. We are wrong, and too often we lose the opportunity to bring our special gifts to bear. These are gifts that only we have. They are not gifts that others can bring. They are the ones that you brought with you and that you are meant to express here. We lose the opportunity to connect, to lift up, to share joy with others. The acts we take, again, don't have to be huge. Even a small one makes a difference. You know this in your own life. Remember when you have done that one thing that made a difference to someone else. Helped a stranger, seen a stressed out mother with 3 young children in the grocery line behind you and just paid for her groceries. Said a kind word to somebody in need. You felt different all day, I'm betting, as they did. You can remind people with every act, you can remind them that joy and hope remain possibilities in this world. I'd like to end with that quote. I'm sure you've heard it, but I just love it. From Bengali writer, musician, and poet Rabindranath Tagore, who wrote, I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted, and behold, service was joy. He slept, he woke, he acted. It wasn't until he acted that he realized that the joy of life lies in service.